It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome back to the Douglas Coleman Show, Matt Hughes. Hi, Matt. Welcome back.
Hey, nice to be here.
Well, thanks for coming back. Last time we talked, which book were you promoting?
Oh, I'm not sure. Might have been Barbarians of the Beyond.
Okay, it was about 3 or 4 months ago. I think you were on the video show in June.
Yeah. Well, I've been rather busy, so I've been putting out backlist titles and getting ready for a new title to come out from my UK publisher. But I think the one that I've been promoting most this year was the Barbarians book, because that is an authorized sequel to a famous series of space opera novels by Jack Vance.
Oh, okay.
And I was authorized by his son, his estate, to set a story in his worlds.
Yeah, this sounds familiar.
It was a good thing for me to do, because I consider Jack Vance to be my model. I don't like to write pastiche, but I'd certainly like to play in his sandbox.
You had mentioned on the show before that you house sit. Are you at the same house, or you moved to a different one now?
Well, I'm at the place we've been since mid-October. It's overlooking the sea in a beautiful well-appointed house on Salt Spring Island, which is on the southwest coast of British Columbia, just above the San Juan Islands. In fact, it's the same chain of islands, and the international boundary runs between them.
Okay, but that wouldn't have been the same house you were in June when we last talked.
No, in June I would have been in Prince George, British Columbia, about 500 miles north of here.
Okay, I forgot how long you've been doing this.
Actually, today is the 27th. So I believe it's 15 years today. Or maybe tomorrow.
So 15 years you've been
a homeless
drifter. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah. That's great. I mean, what is the benefit of that?
The benefit is that I can afford to live on what I make writing genre fiction without being a famous name. I'm a niche author, and I have an appeal to a certain segment of the fantasy, science fiction, and crime reading publics. But as a niche author, I'm not in the middle of the bell curve, so I'm not selling hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of books. I'm selling in the upper hundreds to low thousands, which doesn't make you a lot of money these days. I mean, the revenue that comes from writing fiction has shrunk drastically. You either get what Stephen King gets, or you get next to nothing. There's no middle ground like there used to be. Used to be a guy like me, writing the kind of stuff I write, getting the readers that I get, would have made the income of a high school teacher, say 30 years ago. And today you just don't.
Well, it's interesting, because it's the other way around with music. There used to be no middle ground with music before the DIY digital revolution, but now I know of quite a few musicians who are working class, who are making $40,000, $50,000 a year with all of their online stuff, which would never have been possible prior to that. Why do you think it's the other way with writers?
Because commercial publishing, which is still the bulk of the market, is extremely corporatized. There are 5 big conglomerates that own all the major publishing houses, what used to be the independent standalone houses in the English world publishing. I mean, all of those famous names, Penguin, Random House, Arthur Knopf, and all of those, they've all been absorbed as profit centers in commercial publishing houses. And so they're not run by book people anymore. They're run by bean counters. They're run by money people. Instead of a guy being an actual publisher because he wanted to be in books, you've got somebody who is a profit center manager who has to produce far more return on investment than Simon and Schuster ever had to.
Okay.
They've taken an industry that used to be full of standalone, interesting people doing interesting things, and they've corporatized it, made it homogenous, the same as the movie industry.
Yes.
And they've demanded from it a return on investment that it really couldn't deliver unless they just concentrated on bestsellers. And that's what they do. You know, it used to be you go into a drugstore, you would see a rack there with 40 or 50 different books on it, paperbacks, you know. Now you see 5 or 10 bestsellers. And it's always the same names. There's about 40 or 50 fiction authors, genre fiction authors. And they're the ones whose titles you see. And even after they die, they hire hacks to keep writing, you know, the same characters as the dead guy used to do, and they put it out. And people buy it.
Sounds like James Patterson.
Yeah, well, he's in a class all of his own because he actually has people write books and then put his name on them. But I'm thinking of Robert B. Parker. Did a wonderful series, the Spencer novels, mystery novels, and was, before his death, was embarking on a fascinating Western series about 2 gunfighters going around having adventures. And then he died. But the Spencer novels keep coming out, and the Western novels keep coming out, written by some guy you'd never heard of. So if you see with the cover of one, Robert B. Parker's name is a lot bigger than the name of the guy who wrote it, and it's at the top. It just has an apostrophe S after Parker. It fooled me once. I thought I was getting another Parker book, and I'm a chapter into it and thinking, geez, this guy is really falling down on the job. What happened? And then I looked closely and saw, oh, he's dead. Yeah. Anyway, well, that's not what we were going to talk about today. I'm supposed to be promoting a book.
Well, we'll get to it. I mean, we don't want to do a 4-minute interview. So,
no, okay.
Let me just ask you one thing about that, and then we'll pivot over to your book. Yeah. I mentioned James Patterson. The reason I brought him up is because I'm always curious about this idea of ghostwriting. And I wanted to get your take on that because, to me, I can't help but think that it's something akin to plagiarism. And, you know, it's certainly a no-no to do that in music. You can't, I mean, you're going into Milli Vanilli territory where you say, oh, yes, I sang here, I wrote this song, and in fact you didn't, okay? So why is it acceptable? It's not acceptable to hire somebody to write your college thesis. You get kicked out for that. Why is it?
I know.
Why is it acceptable to do it in the literary world, like Patterson?
Okay. Well, I have been a ghostwriter. I have ghosted the memoirs of 2 prominent Canadians, both people I used to write speeches for in my speechwriting days. And I can defend doing that because my name is on the cover, so it's an as told to kind of thing.
Well, that's different.
And both of them had interesting lives and interesting stories to tell, but were not up to writing it themselves. So
okay, well, I think that's a little different because you're getting credit for it. But the people that are writing for James Patterson, you have no idea who they are.
No, and I've done that too. I've written novels for people whose names appeared on the novels, and they paid me much more than I would have got from a publisher. Because vanity was involved. And, well, in one case, the first one I did, it was a fellow who was excellent at everything he'd ever done, and then he tried his hand at writing a thriller, and he wasn't excellent. And in those days, he had an agent who was the same agent I had. The agent was doing his nonfiction books, which were doing very well, but the guy just had no idea how to write a story. And he wanted to get this story out, and he had the money, and he hired me, and I wrote it, and it is published, and it's got some decent reviews and that kind of thing. Got a major publisher to put it out. I'm not going to say what it is, but so I look at it from my point of view. That was 20-odd years ago. I had a family to feed, and this was a well-paying gig, so I took it.
Well, from that perspective, I get it. I mean, and I don't have a problem with it. Yeah. It just, I can't help but think that if, as an artist, if I do something and it's my creation and I don't get credit for it and someone else takes credit for it, that it's...
Ah, yes, but you got to look at it from my point of view. I never, ever sat in an audience, listened to a guy give a speech I'd written, and then had him ask me to stand up and take a bow. And that was my life's work for 30 years, was other people taking credit for the words I put in their mouths. So I was used to it.
All right. So I suppose that if one is paid, then that's the trade-off. Okay, you're paid,
yeah, it is.
But you're not getting your name on there. It's one or the
That's
other.
right.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I wrote millions of words of speeches. I wrote speeches that changed the directions of political parties. Like the person who was the underdog won the leadership because I did that speech, and they gave the speech right before all the delegates voted, and there it was. I did that 3 times. Yeah, but no, and I never got credit. And actually never wanted it.
Well,
You have
okay.
to be,
all right.
you have to be secret about those things and not say, well, yeah, I wrote that speech. Yeah.
It's a fine line, isn't it? Between...
It's a gray
It's a
area,
gray
let's
area.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's some of it, you have Donald Trump going around talking about how he wrote these wonderful books, The Art of a Deal. He never wrote one. I don't think he's ever read one, to be sure. But he certainly hasn't read his own.
Well, but he's allowed to do it
cover.
because it's an acceptable practice that you can just pay somebody else to write it.
Yeah, it's the same with celebrities and sports people. I mean, Herschel Walker has written a book, apparently, which I find hard to believe. He doesn't sound like a guy who's written a book.
I think anyone can write a book. Not anyone can write a good book.
Okay, but a book that actually hangs together and one sentence connects to the next and that kind of thing.
Well, that's
you
a
need
good
a certain
book.
level of skill.
Yeah, that's a good book. There's certainly a lot of bad books out there, but that's a whole nother.
Oh yeah,
that's a whole nother show.
Yep.
All right, let's pivot over to your new book. It's called The Emir's Falcon.
Yep.
All right, tell us about that.
All right, there's a story behind it. Almost 50 years ago now, 1977 it would have been. So 45 years ago, I was the staff speechwriter on the personal staff of the Minister of Environment in Canada, and one of his responsibilities was the Canadian Wildlife Service. And one of the things the Canadian Wildlife Service was doing was running a breeding and rearing center on a military base in Alberta to bring back peregrine falcons who had been almost driven to extinction by the effects of DDT. If you remember, Silent Spring and Rachel Carson, where she came out and said, DDT getting spread everywhere to kill mosquitoes and bugs. It means that birds' eggs are soft, and when the mums sit on the eggs, they squash them, and pretty soon we're not going to have any birds, and you're going to have a silent spring. In Canada, a wildlife biologist took this to heart and got the Wildlife Service to set up this breeding facility, and they began to breed and rear peregrine falcons so they could release them into the wild. And it worked very, very well. Finally, the species was reestablished. By the 80s or 90s, and they shut the thing down. But the interesting wrinkle that happened in the 70s, the place had been open for a few years, Canada was trying to sell something to an Emir of one of the Gulf states, the Persian Gulf, a desalinization plant, I think, to be powered by a CANDU nuclear reactor, these little mini reactors that Canada was building in those days and selling abroad. And so to sweeten that deal, the government decided to take a couple of the falcons and give them to the Emir, which, they were within their rights to do. They were government-owned birds. But the birds were actually being looked after in the facility by teenage volunteers. And I thought to myself at the time, some kid has just found out his bird is going off to be a rich man's toy far away. And how would he feel about that? And that was the genesis of the story. I just kept it in the back of my head for about 40 years. And then one day I said, why don't I write that? So I wrote it. and a friend of mine who's a fairly well-known Canadian science fiction author, Edward Willett, it turned out, had set up a small press to produce just that kind of thing. So we made a deal, and now it's come out last month, and we're seeing how it does.
Okay.
It's basically a story of three characters. There's a farm boy whose parents want him to take over the feedlot, but he wants to be a wildlife biologist because he's been working with the birds. And then there is the son of the Emir, who has come to collect the bird in the ceremony and finds out he can't because the boy steals the bird and runs off into a place he knows in Alberta that I know called the Swan Hills, wild country. And in the Swan Hills is a young Métis girl, they're all teenagers, called Rosie Lebouquin, and the three of them come together because the cops come to look for the kid and the bird in her territory, and her dad is going to guide them, and then the Arab son comes because he wants to be there to protect his father's interest. And they can probably get a better deal out of this because Canada has been embarrassed by all this situation. So it's that reasonably complex a situation that brings them all together. Plus the fact that it's a bear. The Swan Hills is a preserve for plains grizzlies, which are the biggest grizzlies you can find. And that factors into it as well, especially at the climax.
It sounds interesting. How many books in a year do you normally write?
Well, novels, no more than a couple of novels a year. But I have done an awful lot of short story writing for magazines. Like I think I've had 42 in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, which is sort of like the best fantasy and science fiction magazine in the world, probably. And then I collect those stories. Usually it's like one character, and I write 8 or 9 episodes, which really I'm writing a novel in episodes, selling them to the magazine one at a time. Then I put them out together as a self-published novel, which means I get paid twice, which is very important in this business.
Getting paid at all is... because, I mean, it's what you get for a short story in a major digest magazine is about the same as you would have got in 1970. And I'm not accounting for inflation. I mean, you would have got 10 cents a word back then. You get 10 cents a word now. Wow.
So 10 cents is worth a lot less than it used to be.
Oh, sure. Well, it wasn't even worth that much then. But, wow.
Well, you can make a living at it. People did. You know, if guys like Bob Silverberg was bashing out 2 or 3 stories a month at least, and at 10 cents a word, he was living, well, you know, at least as comfortably as a senior high school teacher.
All right. Now, the book is out now. You said, how long has it been out?
I think September 27th was the release date officially.
Okay, so
it's been out a month.
All right.
Yeah.
And
it's got some interesting blurb reviews from people, you know, other established young adult authors.
All right.
Which is nice. Yeah.
Well, we're going to wind this down on that note. Give out your website, please.
It is www.matthewhughes, 2 T's in Matthew, .org.
Okay. And there's all your books and everything is there? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole bibliography. One thing, if people go there, there's a little form up in the corner. You can sign up for my monthly newsletter. And if you sign up for my monthly newsletter, I will send you a free ebook.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on back again, and I look forward to your next book.
Let's do it again next year. Yeah.
I'm sure we will. All right, Matt. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to The Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Gail Smith. Hi, Gail. How are you?
Hi, Douglas. I'm good.
Good. Thank you for coming on
this show. Nice to be talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. So you're an author. You're in Saskatchewan. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I am in Saskatchewan.
All right. Your book is called Thickwood. And before we get to your book, I always like to ask the author to tell us a little about themselves before we start on your book. So let's see, it says on your bio, it says you grew up on a mixed subsistence farm in central Alberta. Well, what does that mean exactly?
When I was a very young child, my parents were on a subsistence farm, so we grew a lot of our own food. So in the early 60s, there was power to our farm. There wasn't running water in the house except for at the kitchen sink. We had a little bit of water that came from a boiler down by the coal furnace. And we had an outhouse outside and a big garden, and we had milk cows and chickens and pigs and cattle and horses. And so this environment is where I started my life as a young child. And my grandparents were in farms close by too, so I spent a lot of time with my extended family, with cousins and grandparents and on this farm. I mean, we later moved to the city, but that is a very critical time in my life where I had a lot of memories.
Okay,
I think influenced my writing. Yeah.
I mispronounced that. I said substance. It's subsistence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Subsistence, meaning that, you can subsist on the farm. It provides you with your basic food, is how I would understand.
So what do you do now aside from writing? Do you do something else other than writing?
Right now, I had a career as in the mental health profession in several aspects of it over 25 years, but I always, over the last 30 years, I've always been on my farm with my husband raising our children, and horses have always been a big part of my life. We also raised cattle, and had some crops as well, and grew some hay to feed our cows. So I kind of had this dual life between working off the farm and being very involved in being on the farm. Now I'm retired from my off-the-farm job. So I have 7 grandchildren, but my husband and I are still extremely active with our horses and with mentoring other people in horseback riding and competing in sports and having a lot of fun with our animals and with the people that are involved with horses as well.
All right, great. So I'm looking at the book cover photo. There is a picture. Is that you?
No, it isn't.
Oh.
It's not me. The cover was designed by a professional designer, but that's very close. I would say lots of people probably wonder that and wonder if it is me. I had a gray horse that inspired a horse character in the book, and it's kind of an elusive photo of the woman with her hat down over her face, but that looks like it could have been me in that picture. Yes.
All right.
But it's not me.
Is this your first novel? Your first published novel, I should say?
Yes, it is my first published novel. Yes, I did write another novel, which we call it The One in the Trunk. So it's there. I practice writing a novel with it, and someday I might visit it again. But right now I'm pretty busy with this novel and launching it, and also another one that I'm working on.
Okay. What made you decide to start writing then?
To start writing? I think I always, from a very young age, because I was on this farm and in this environment where I was very much in nature, but my mom was a teacher and she loved reading to me. And so I was very engaged in reading and books and drawing and writing little stories for myself. And I had a grandmother who loved poetry and would write and recite poetry, and a great-grandfather who did the same. So I was in this literary kind of rural world with animals. And I think as I moved forward in life, I just was always a reader and loved English and writing. And part of my career did involve a lot of writing. And when I stepped away from that aspect of my working in the helping profession, then I found there was a gap in writing. And I think when I reflect back on that, I think then I had room in my life to express myself on paper again. And so I just, sometimes I couldn't stop myself. I started writing some poetry in the 90s, and then I guess I got confidence in writing, and I just kept pursuing it. I took classes from the extension department at the local university, and I managed to get enough of a portfolio together that I was accepted into a short story class by a very well-known author in Saskatchewan, Guy Vanderhaeg. And then from there, I had a writing group. And then from there, I applied to the University of Saskatchewan's MFA program in writing. And so I got accepted, and it was thrilling for me to be part of that program and to develop my manuscript that turned into this novel.
Okay. How long has Thickwood been out?
It's just been launched this October. So I'm on my way to Regina, which is the capital of Saskatchewan, capital city of Saskatchewan, to do a reading and launch tonight. And I did one launch last night in Saskatoon, kind of like the sister city to Regina. And so, I've just pulled over on the side of the road here in Treaty 6 territory in the province of Saskatchewan, and I left Treaty 6 territory. I'm always mindful of our First Nations people in Saskatchewan and where I am on the landscape, and so now I'm going down to Saskatchewan, to Regina, to do a reading down there.
You're in your car right now?
Yeah, I am. I'm sitting in my car looking at the blue sky and the broad Saskatchewan landscape.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. You're not moving though. You parked?
No, I'm parked.
Okay, that's good.
I'm parked. The car's turned off.
All right. Well, tell us a little about the book. It says on your bio that it is a mix of World of Horses and women's professional baseball intertwined. That's an interesting combination.
Yes.
So tell us a little about it. Give us a synopsis.
Yes, I will. Well, part of what started me to write this story was in Saskatchewan and a little bit in Alberta and Manitoba, we had for many decades, since late 1930s, we had a program in the province called the PFRA program, and that's where the government brought together lands that were more marginal and shouldn't have been cultivated and needed to be reclaimed into grasslands, and they turned those lands into community pastures. And then in the mid-2000s, about 2013, 12 or 13 in there, they announced that they were going to shut down that program. And so that started the community pasture program in the province started to wind down. And my husband and I used the community pasture program when we had cattle, and we knew a lot of pasture managers, and it's a whole cowboy culture and whole unique way of life in the community pasture program. People have grown up in that situation. And so it was kind of sad for us, or for me, to see it ending as we knew it anyways. And so I found out that as I explored the character that I'd had in mind, that I wanted to set her in this setting, but make it a historical setting. So I put it at the front end of the formation of a community pasture. Now, the novel isn't just about that, but that kind of creates a backdrop for the character to express herself and face challenges and difficulties. And this is in post-World War II. And I also found out in my research that there was about 63 Canadian women that were recruited to play in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And it just so happened that 25 of those women, about a fairly significant portion of them, were recruited from Saskatchewan. And so I thought that there was a lot of things in common between a woman pitching a ball overhand, because later on in the league's history, they turned to overhand pitching, which was quite challenging, and that meant they needed to recruit more pitchers, and that there's some similar skill sets to throwing a lasso and roping cattle. So I thought that created a really interesting mix in my character. And as it turned out, that I went up to a little community named Leask, which is just beside the Thickwood Hills, where my book is named after and where it's set in. Even though I have a fictional setting, the Thickwood Hills are real. I found out that one of the people who visited came to my launch and little reading at that time had a relative who did in fact play with the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. So it was kind of cool to see that there actually was a connection from that community to baseball. So I just found it just so fascinating, and I love rural life and horses, and I also love baseball, so it was a natural fit for me.
Is there a baseball league in Canada?
Yes, yeah. The Toronto Maple Leafs are pretty, have quite a dedicated following.
Toronto Maple Leafs, that's right. Yeah. Okay, all right.
I hope I've got the name of the league right. Yeah.
I forgot it, because, I grew up in Boston, and it was Red Sox all the time. The Blue Jays, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Correct that on.
Okay.
It's the Toronto Blue Jays are very popular in Toronto, and I know my husband and I have visited the center there, and been looked on the field. So
okay, so cool. This book is a fiction, but is it a historical fiction? And there's elements of reality in it, right? Like you said, Thickwood is a real place, and the baseball part of it, the story was true, right?
Yes, there are elements of reality in it for sure. I did a lot of research, so there are places that I name in Illinois, and that actually did exist. I was able to do a lot of online research and look up old hotels and old movie theaters and explore the towns that the women would have played and toured. And also in Chicago, what was going on in Chicago at the time. So I did a lot of exploring virtually of those areas. And likewise, the history in Saskatchewan after World War II is quite accessible. And I really appreciated being able to explore that environment here in Saskatchewan, because after World War II, the rural Western Canada was still very undeveloped. People still were trying to get telephones. They were still trying to get power to their farms. They were still trying to get running water into their homes. And so they had this kind of life that I experienced when I was very young. And so I could really relate to it and kind of relive it as I wrote my story. And then when the women went to play baseball, they had, running water, and they had their laundry done, and, they could go to beauty parlors and see movies. And so it was quite a contrast in these two worlds, which I enjoyed putting my character in.
Okay. Well, we got to wind this down. We just kind of run out of time. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Do you have a website you want to give out? Personal one or one for the book?
You can find me on Instagram at Gallop Ale, and also I have a Facebook page, just Gail M. Smith, and you can follow my horse adventures on there, my writing adventures as well, and I welcome people to look me up. I have a blog as well, so I think if you start down the social media exploration, you'll find me, Gail M. Smith, on Facebook, Instagram, and on my blog.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And you're going to a meet and greet or something right now?
I'm going to read selections from my novel.
Oh, reading,
and,
okay.
Meet and greet people.
Yeah,
for
great.
sure. Reading and launch, I guess.
Okay.
We're going to meet in a pub.
Oh, super. Great place
Anyway.
to meet. Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on. And best of luck with the book. Hope it does well.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.